Hey guys, it's Friday night, April 22nd, and I had planned to make this video tonight about how much time should we spend with God and just talk about that a little bit. Now, what was really cool is last night I was at the elder meeting, and one of the elders started talking about encouraging just believers in our body about their devotional time, but to do it in a way that is gracious, that doesn't lead to legalism. And we're just talking about that. And I was totally quiet because I knew I was going to record this video and I just wanted to see what the Lord was going to do. And I thought it was just a nice little confirmation that this was the thing that we were supposed to talk about. So I am so excited. So let's just go ahead and get into it and talk about it. So as we know, how long should my devotional be? That's a controversial topic. Makes us feel emotional, makes us feel guilty, right? So how do we approach that issue? Well, I once have heard said that here's the path of life. On either side of the path of life that we're supposed to walk on, there's a ditch on both extremes, right? So you can have the legalism extreme on one side, and then you can have the false grace extreme on the other side. So I'm hoping to talk about both of these a little bit today. I feel in my heart that I should talk a little bit more about false grace. So I'm going to lean a little bit more heavily on that. But Jesus said in Matthew 6, when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. So Jesus is telling us that our prayers shouldn't be legalistic, right? It shouldn't be full of repetition, and we shouldn't just be spending time with God to make Him to do something. That is not, the kind of relational prayer that we are supposed to have with the Father. So that's the grace, aspect of it, helping us avoid legalism. We're just going to do this thing because if we do this, then we can make God do that. And it's this rote thing that is disconnected of a relationship, and it's full of guilt and not good stuff, and we don't want to do that. The funny thing, though, is that Jesus seems to do the opposite of what He said, which He wasn't really, but just follow along with me for a while. He used to withdraw to lonely places to pray often. At times He would spend all night praying, especially if He had an important decision to make. In the Garden of Gethsemane, in Mark 14, it actually says that He did what sounds like the opposite thing that He said to do, right? It says, Mark 14:35, and going a little further, He fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from Him. And then verse 39 says, and again He went away and prayed, saying the same words. Even though, in Matthew 6, He says, you don't need to say the same stuff all the time. Well, in the Garden of Gethsemane, that's sort of what He did, right? And I think the key there is to remember that Jesus said, don't heap up empty phrases, right? I think the operative word there is empty, meaning empty of a relationship of real meaning with God. Don't do it in a legalistic way. But that, of course, doesn't mean that not spending time with God isn't important, and even that the amount matters, because I think it does. And a lot of times it does. As part of Jesus' discipleship program, He sometimes took His disciples on some of these prayer vigils that He would have. And interestingly, as far as I can see, there's only one time in the Gospels that the disciples ask Him to teach them to do something, and that is to pray. They went on these prayer vigils with Him, and then after a while they'd be like, can you teach us to pray like you do? Because that's not the empty phrase thing that you're doing. You're spending a lot of time in prayer, but it's not heaping up empty phrases, and it's not legalistic. How do you do that? And I think that's a big sign of how important prayer was in Jesus' life. Again, we got to be filled with grace, but we got to understand that for Jesus, persevering in prayer was very important. And in fact, there were some times that He expected His disciples to be able to do it. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Matthew 26, it says, and He came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And He said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So Jesus clearly said, could you not watch with me 1 hour? That's pretty specific. He had that expectation, right? Clearly, after walking 3 years with him, learning to pray with him, he expected them to persevere for an hour. And it's hard to miss the reality of what happened next. Jesus persevered in prayer through that hour, and he passed the test of the cross. They did not persevere, and they did not pass their test. They failed their test, So am I saying that if you don't spend an hour with God, then your life's gonna be full of sin? That is not what I am saying, right? That spending an hour with God is not a sign of being a good Christian. What I am saying is that as we mature, one of the signs of our maturity is that over time, extended periods of time, we should be able to spend more time with God, right? And the fact that Jesus expected that of his disciples, to me, is a hope that is doable, right? It's not a burden, but that is something that is doable. And he wouldn't have said that to them if that was something that they could not do. If they were not ready to do that, he would not have that expectation, because that's not what he's like, right? So again, in Christianity, we tend to go to these two extremes, right? Where we're really legalistic, or we're like totally in false grace, but we got to walk in that path of life in the middle. And one thing that I want to remind us of is how do we not engage in the false grace? I think Hebrews 10:24 has a good answer to that. It says, let us consider how we may spur one another towards love and good deeds. That's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to spur you on towards greater love. One of many ways, which is spending time with God. We avoid false grace by not criticizing or not trying to get people to be less passionate for Jesus. That's how we avoid, that's one of the ways, I think perhaps a principal way, that we avoid false grace. We spur one another towards love and good deeds. We don't say, oh, just simmer down, just simmer down. I've become convinced that genuine passion for Jesus often draws criticism. We see that in the Gospels with Mary of Bethany. She often shows up being very extravagant in the way that she relates to Jesus. And she's always criticized, right? She's usually criticized, but Jesus always defends her openly. In fact, I believe that the model of devotion in the Gospels is Mary of Bethany. That's how the Gospel writers seem to present her. And, she is, we want to be like Mary of Bethany. We don't want to spur each other towards less. We want to be like Mary of Bethany. We want to have extravagant love for Jesus. We don't want to be those who minimize passion, minimize devotion, right? So how do we find that balance, though, between not being legalistic, not having false grace, not being harsh on ourselves, not excusing, whatever. And I think that what we do is we always encourage each other towards greater love without comparing ourselves to each other. Mary of Bethany poured a year's worth of perfume on Jesus' feet, and the widow with 2 copper coins, she put 2 copper coins in the treasury. Guess what? They were equally wholehearted. Jesus held them up in the same way. He had the same positive words about both of them. So I think we are all, without exception, called to extravagant, wholehearted lives of devotion to Jesus, which includes the amount of time we spend with him. But we are not called to compare each other's devotion to Jesus. The amount of time that I spend with Jesus is completely irrelevant to you, and vice versa. Right? That way, I believe we can always spur each other towards greater love and give grace to each other. Right? We're doing both things at the same time. So to answer the question that we asked in the beginning, how much time should you spend with Jesus? I think the answer is the amount that looks like wholehearted love to you. Be wholehearted. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise.